Hey there boys and girls, welcome back to BackPocketGameReviews, and this is a video I'm actually extremely excited to shoot because we're going to talk a little bit about the history of the firearms, specifically the history of the firearms that appear in Red Dead Redemption 2. Now, I'm a huge fan of when a game goes very historically accurate, and I also like when there are a lot of nods to real world stuff. So we're going to explain some of this. And a big part of what made me want to do this is there's a lot of references to Smith & Wesson in there. And for those of you who don't know, most of my firearm collection is all made by Smith & Wesson, specifically because I love the history behind Smith & Wesson. That is a huge reason of why I am such a big Smith & Wesson fan, or at least part of it. Now, one thing that makes this so important is back in this particular time period, back in the late 1800s, it was very common for when you would see people in this era, when they would get pictures professionally done, they may pose, you may see their firearm posed in the picture like this, or shown somewhere in the photo. And part of the reason why is it was very common for you to take pictures with your firearm because it was considered your prized possession. That's why a lot of people would have like their wife's hand on their shoulder and they'd be posing with their firearm. The firearm was considered a huge piece to this time period because it could put food on the table, it defended you against other people. It was just a very valuable piece, and they still weren't very cheap even back in this time period. There were guns you could get relatively cheap, and most of these you would order through a catalog, and then they would, if they had a lot of money, would customize them, so like you could actually order a custom engraved Colt Peacemaker back in the day if you had the money to do so. But I believe when the Colt Peacemaker came out, I believe it actually cost like $25, and that was considered highly expensive in that time. So, moving forward, we're going to talk about some of the firearms they included, and why they are important firearms, and why it's just nice to see this nod. So the first one I chose to talk about is actually one of the first firearms you can unlock in the game. It is the cattleman pistol. So a lot of you might go, oh, there's no such thing as a cattleman pistol. Well, yeah, actually there is. So the cattleman pistol is Uberti, or I believe there's also another company that makes these called Pierti? There's another company that makes these. But essentially these are replicas or reproductions of the Colt Peacemaker. However, most people aren't going to choose to use the name Colt Peacemaker because, well, you gotta pay Colt a lot more licensing and stuff along those lines if you're using that specific name. The Colt Peacemaker was known under several different names. Cattleman would just be typically what you would find it under today if you were searching for a replica reproduction of it, because I can also assume that Rockstar probably didn't want to pay the rights to Colt to use the word Peacemaker. Colt has brought back the Peacemaker before, or also, as it's commonly referred to, the Single Action Army, or the Colt 45. It is known as both of those. However, there are several firearms that do get identified as the Colt 45. The next on this list, so keep in mind the Cattleman revolver came out in 1872, and it is commonly referred to as the revolver that won the West. However, that is not 100% accurate because it may have been the bigger name, but there was one that's actually more important, which would be the Schofield revolver. Schofield revolver is actually a revolver made by Smith & Wesson, and it is a modified version of the Smith & Wesson Model 3. So the Smith & Wesson Model 3 is one of the most famous and popular firearms. The Schofield was made by General Schofield. It is essentially a modified Smith & Wesson Model 3 to make it more appealing to a cavalry member. So what makes that so important? We're going to pretend like this is a revolver because Nick does not have a revolver. We're going to say right here is the cylinder. It would actually break, so you'd have access to the entire cylinder, but as it broke, it also had a little lever that would eject all of the casings of the spent rounds. So rather than having to sit there like with the Colt has a little lever on the front that runs under the actual barrel of the firearm, and for each round that you needed to eject, you would have to slide that lever back. And you could get relatively fast at this, but this, being able to do that also while one-handed on a horse, just a lot of people would break it against their knee, it would pop open, and then all you have to do is stick in your new rounds, close it, and you're ready to go. Now, the Schofield revolver, or the Model 3 Smith & Wesson, came out in 1868. It actually had a exclusivity patent. So there was a patent that Smith & Wesson held, allowing them to pretty much own the market on revolvers for a while. So the Peacemaker didn't come out for several years later. Now, the big part with the Schofield was it was actually widely used by the cavalry for a while due to General Schofield. However, the Peacemaker later got to be the actual overly used revolver by the cavalry and the military, mostly because they could just order all of the same ammo, whereas they were essentially having, we need this for the cavalry, we need this for the army, so they just made it all one giant unified ordering process of now you all use this ammo. But the Schofield was also one of the first revolvers to take an enclosed cased bullet, so a bullet that would be more close to what we assume and think of today when we traditionally think of a round or a cartridge. The round is actually the whole thing put together, the bullet is the projectile, and the casing would be what's left after the bullet leaves the cartridge. So, huge pieces of innovation here. These are all technologies that really propelled us into the future, and a lot of you might not also understand that this kept being a huge part of our actual culture and our history, and a lot of what plays a part in what molded and shaped America even into the early 1900s. So now the next one we're going to talk about on the list is the Volcanic pistol. The Volcanic pistol is actually really cool, and it's something that a lot of people don't know about, but it used what was called a rocket ball. It is a ball-like projectile, and they would use rifling to kind of spin it and get it to go a little more quick. The Volcanic was actually a lever action pistol. So lever action means you would drop a little lever, it would eject the spent casing and load the next round into the chamber. But it did that with a rocket ball as opposed to an actual bullet or cartridge as you would identify today. Now, the Volcanic pistol was also made by Smith & Wesson. So it was made by Smith & Wesson, but they were called Smith & Wesson Corporation, and then eventually changed their name to Volcanic Firearms. And then after they sold the rights to the Volcanic firearms to Winchester, they eventually became Smith & Wesson revolvers, which is what they are known for today. So, the Volcanic pistol was pretty innovative. They actually had a Volcanic rifle as well, and they sold the rights over to Winchester just right before the actual rifle was getting ready to come out. So it is pretty interesting invention. It is also really crazy to see them include this in the game, and it is considered to be one of the highest damage pistols in the game. So that's pretty cool. This came out in 1855, was the first time the Volcanic hit the market. Obviously there are other repeating firearms, and we will get into that in a minute. But none of the repeating firearms you're going to see in the game actually specifically have a name. They have like the Lancaster or the carbine repeater. So keep in mind, the first repeater was really the Henry repeater, which did it first, but then you have who came along with Winchester and kind of perfected it. So the Winchester repeaters were considered to be more accurate and more efficient than the Henry repeaters. But the Henry repeating rifle was obviously one that most people think of when they hear repeating rifle. Also, they still exist to this day, so you can still go buy a Henry repeater rifle. Crazy, right? Next up would be the Mauser. Obviously, you know what the Mauser is. It is one of what we would consider today's more closest firearm cousins. It doesn't use, it's not like a magazine fed, so like here you got like a magazine that feeds into the actual firearm, It didn't use a magazine. It used the strips, the strips that would feed through the ammo. So it was kind of close to what we would use today. It is a semi-automatic pistol, so it would automatically just load the next round directly into the chamber and fire it. The Mauser actually came out in 1870. It was also commonly referred to as the broom handle, and did see several times it got used in military battle. So not uncommon to see those in military use, specifically in World War I, where it was extremely common. You would also sometimes see the Mauser get used with a shoulder harness, so there was a stock that they would actually put onto the Mauser, and it would turn that pistol into essentially like a rifle, supposedly giving it more accuracy at a distance. So the Mauser would be the closest thing to a modern day pistol you would see really on that list, and they have another pistol on there called the semi-automatic pistol, which kind of resembles a Luger, but I can't really say 100% that it is a Luger. It does less damage than the Mauser too, so chances are you're probably never really going to use it. Next up, we're going to talk about the Springfield rifle. Obviously, the Springfield rifle is made by Springfield Armory. They're still, again, a major company today. They are commonly still purchased and are one of the larger manufacturers of handguns today. So Springfield Armory is not actually an armory, but they do get a lot, they used to get a lot of military contracts back in the day. The Springfield rifle actually originally came out in 1855. However, it does refer to several different rifles. So this isn't like oh, this one Springfield rifle. It could literally refer to, like, I think it's like 25 different rifles that fall under this category. There's a lot. Most commonly, though, it's referring to the 1903 rifle. A lot of times, the technology of a firearm is very specific to that year, and sometimes you may hear a firearm as, you know, the same. Oh, that's the Springfield rifle. Well, which one? That doesn't really narrow that down. However, it is also a very commonly referred to rifle throughout history, but I can't tell you which one the game's referring to. But they do have the Springfield rifle in there. Then, they also have the rolling block rifle. The rolling block rifle is one of the more technology innovative firearms of the time. It was considered to be very accurate at a distance. It would be kind of close to like the first sniper rifle, so to speak. And it was actually made by none other than Remington, who is trash today, so please don't buy Remington firearms. But it actually came out in 1860. There were several rolling block rifles, but the rolling block technology was very innovative for its particular time. Then you also have the Carcano rifle. I really don't know much about this particular rifle, but it came out in 1891. Yeah, so then you also have a shotgun. So we're going to talk a little bit about the technology behind the shotgun that they have in there. So in the game, you can actually get a pump-action shotgun, and the pump-action shotgun would have came out in the late 1800s. Don't get me wrong, there were talks of them being pump-action shotguns beforehand, but the first widely produced ones would have been the late 1800s. And part of what made a pump-action shotgun so innovative was, so it is called a pump-action. The action refers to the way that a particular piece of it functions. So, like, for example, when I cock this back, what that does is there are pieces here that will rip the shell, or the casing of the shell, out of the chamber, and then when I pull forward, it would load the next cartridge into the barrel. So that's specifically referring to the action that it is performing. So, lever action would be down and in. But the pump action shotgun is something you don't typically see in games that time period, but it actually would be pretty common back then. Actually, Remington made one of the first pump action shotguns, and the ones in that game is most likely a Remington shotgun, which is what Remington is literally the most known for. They were really known for rifles, shotguns is what really took them to being the company that they eventually became, and they actually made the first trench gun, which would be a modified version of their first pump-action shotgun, which is most likely the particular shotgun that is in Red Dead Redemption. It is not mentioned what name it is. However, all of these are ordered in a catalog, and you can see little tidbits. It's really hard to read, some of the print's really small, but you can see little tidbits written about the different firearms in there. It is really cool to get that kind of feel, because it's almost like you're looking through a Sears catalog. It's pretty cool. I love this about this game, that they tried to remain so accurate to the time period. And a lot of those firearms are just huge technological advancements of that time. So I do appreciate that they stayed as accurate as they are. They don't really mention any of the names. Like, it's not like you're going to see Smith & Wesson in there or Remington, because they would have to pay a lot of licensing fees for that. And they obviously don't want to do that. But still, nonetheless, this is something I appreciated that they did very much, and it was really fun to get to see a lot of these, because the second I saw the Volcanic, I was like, oh my god, I can't believe they would include that in this game. Or even like when I saw the Schofield, which I actually knew about the Schofield beforehand, which I was really excited to get to talk about. Smith & Wesson's Model 3 is probably one of their most iconic firearms, and the Schofield was actually, so a lot of you probably don't know this, and this is part of why it's so important, and a lot of people don't understand, like, oh, the Peacemaker is what won the West. Jesse James actually carried a Smith & Wesson Schofield. Like, that was his preferred firearm. Or even Annie Oakley also carried a Schofield. Those are two huge names from that time period, and both of them opted for that particular firearm over a Peacemaker. So for me, this all was very interesting, and I love history, so I enjoyed getting to do a slight bit of research. I had to do some research on some of the rifles, because that's where my knowledge kind of fizzles out a little bit. Specifically with the Springfield, I didn't know that there were that many of them. I knew about the rolling block. The technology was pretty cool behind it. Obviously, you've got bolt-action rifles in the game. A lot of this stuff, though, is very new technology of this time, and a lot of this is part of what jump-started this era, and eventually even like these firearm technologies evolve, and Smith & Wesson and Remington and all of them still become very, very important even when you move into the age of the gangsters. So like the early 1900s, and we start talking about like the different Magnum rounds that they had to invent, which a lot of that was to do away with the gangsters that were wearing body armor, had bulletproof glass. So really interesting to hear about, really fun to learn about. If you guys enjoyed this though, let me know. You can drop a thumbs up. If you have any questions, you can post them down in the comments, or if there's something you would like to add to anything that I stated, again, comments is the place to do that. Also, don't forget to check out the description box. That's where you can find anywhere else you can follow me. And if you're new here to the channel, don't forget to click that subscribe button and ding the bell, because if you don't ding the bell, it won't actually tell you that I uploaded anything. Thanks for watching. I'm going to have plenty more content coming for you, and stick around.